So yesterday, on board a flight from Thailand to Germany, a man mysteriously fell ill. At first, he was experiencing cold sweats and chills. A doctor on board said that he was going to be okay. The flight attendant made him a hot cup of tea, and as he started sipping on this tea, he started bleeding everywhere. And I'm not talking about spitting up a little bit of mucus, phlegm, and blood. I'm not talking about a nosebleed, a regular nosebleed, no. He started hemorrhaging, spewing, spraying blood all over the airplane. This stuff was projectile, shooting out of his nose and mouth. Liters and liters of blood. They winded up turning the airplane around, landing, and the guy died. Now, at the time of this recording, no one knows what caused this to happen. No one knows what type of illness or what this guy was dealing with. But as soon as I heard about it, it immediately made me think of the Marburg-virus. And it immediately made me think back to a couple of months ago. Because a few months ago, a little bit longer than a few months maybe, there was an outbreak in multiple countries of the Marburg-virus. Now, surprisingly enough, there was not a lot of talk about this in the mainstream media in America. Usually, they like to hop on any sickness they can so they can spread fear and hopefully get us into another lockdown. But in this situation, a very real situation, it was radio silence for the most part. Crickets. But I did know that behind the scenes, there was a lot of talk going on about the Marburg virus and about Ebola. And what could be the next big thing that sends the world into a frenzy, much like what we went through a few years ago. Well, after I saw this news article about this guy dying on the airplane, after I remembered all of those reports of the Marburg virus from a few months ago, I started to just look into things. And it turns out that there has been a renewed focus. A lot of money has been shifting around and has been put into developing a new jab, a vaccine, if you will, a cure for the Marburg. The Marburg, that actually sounds like a better name, but the Marburg. It turns out that in recent months, all of a sudden, they've been doing a lot of research and they've been trying to develop this new vaccine. Now, maybe the reason they're doing that is because of the outbreaks in Tanzania, but it just makes you wonder. It makes you wonder what's really going on behind the scenes. So I started to just snoop around a little bit more. And as always, it turns out there was a big training exercise in New York where they trained on how to handle a potential outbreak of the Marburg. A lot of you watching this video right now, you've never even heard of the Marburg. You don't even know what I'm talking about. You've never heard of it a day in your life, yet, unbeknownst to us all, there's been major training exercises already around the country. The biggest being in New York City, training for a possible upcoming outbreak of this deadly disease. And this happens all the time. Every single time there's something big, something crazy happening, there's always a training exercise that comes beforehand. Almost as if these people always know, okay, something is going to happen, we're going to train for it, and then a couple of weeks later it will happen. The same thing happened with the beer bug. If you watch my channel, we've talked about this so much, so I don't want to go into detail here. But if you're a person that likes to know about things and you like to do research, look up Event 201, look up things like that. But apparently, behind the scenes, in a society where they literally try to scare us about the common cold, this disease that has a very high death rate, it's like, oh, we're not really talking about that at all. But we're having major training exercises. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to warn you about this one because this is actually deadly for real. But we're going to have the training exercises that always comes before a major event, of course. But let's go ahead and see what's going on here. NYC Health Hospitals lead multi-agency training exercise for Marburg virus. Patients simulated symptoms of Marburg virus to test healthcare providers' ability to quickly identify, isolate, and coordinate transport to NYC Health hospitals. During the drill, healthcare and EMS workers donned appropriate personal protective equipment and followed strict protocols to protect against exposure to the Marburg virus. NYC Health Hospitals yesterday led a training exercise testing the healthcare system's ability to identify and isolate patients with simulated Marburg virus symptoms and safely transport them to NYC Health hospitals and facilities. Healthcare and EMS workers needed to wear hazmat suits and follow strict protocols to ensure their safety while handling the patients to prevent exposure to the pathogen. The Marburg, a cousin of the Ebola, with a fatality rate as high as 80%, requires strict health and transport safety protocols in suspected patients. In the past year, there have been a small number of outbreaks of Marburg in Africa, including most recently in Tanzania and Guinea this year. The exercise was no notice, meaning healthcare workers seeing the two simulated patients did not know it was a drill until they successfully isolated the patient and notified the NYC Health Department of the suspected Marburg infected patient. The exercise was a coordinated effort between the health system, the fire department's emergency medical services, the NYC Health Department, NYC Emergency Management, and the Office of Chief Medical Examiner. Now that's kind of crazy. I didn't know that. So during this drill, the people who they sent out, they didn't know they were on a drill. They thought that they were dealing with real life Marburg patients. Okay? They thought these people were infected for real. So I find this concerning because it seems even more extreme and more realistic than most of the training exercises that we've looked at on this channel in the past. And think about being in that scenario as a healthcare worker. And, you know, are you really paid enough to expose yourself to a virus with an 80% death rate? I would be really freaked out. But let's go forward. New York City is a national leader in understanding how to respond, transport, and treat highly infectious diseases like Marburg. While the likelihood is very low that a virus as deadly as Marburg reaches our shores, this city prepares for it anyway. Let's pause right there. Why is the likelihood very low? I agree that in years past, maybe if we're talking decades ago, the likelihood would be low. But I don't think the likelihood is low anymore. Have you seen the southern border? Have you not seen the southern border? People are pouring into our country from Africa every day by the thousands. You think that this stuff can't be spread simply because most of the outbreaks are happening in Guinea or Tanzania or in this African country or over here in that country or over there or over there? When every single day you have thousands of people from these countries pouring into our country freely across the southern border, let's be honest here, folks. we are opening ourselves up to all types of nonsense, not just violent crimes, not just, a housing crisis, but we're opening ourselves to multiple other things. We're opening ourselves to the possibilities of these crazy diseases spreading throughout our country, being brought over here by God knows who, and maybe even purposely. Although some people will bring this stuff unknowingly, right? But let's go forward. Unfortunately, our city is no stranger to treating diseases like Ebola and Marburg, as we saw with the Ebola virus in 2014. Back then, our paramedics, EMTs, and firefighters did a tremendous job ensuring patient safety and safety of all FDNY members who responded. Yesterday's exercise is a demonstration of the interagency collaboration required to keep 8 million New York City residents safe. Drills like these help our health professionals practice for extreme events so they can focus on protecting their patients and the public when called upon. We constantly need to practice swift and strong responses to protect New Yorkers from public health threats, including highly lethal diseases like Marburg. The training exercise involved 2 different scenarios. The first scenario involved a patient who arrives at the emergency department of NYC Health Hospitals with Marburg virus symptoms. The hospital staff has to recognize that the patient's symptoms combined with travel history and other risk factors suggest a potentially lethal virus. Then they have to isolate the patient and notify the health department. The patient then dies in the ambulance, followed by a discussion with the Office of Chief Medical Examiner on the management protocol for a patient with a highly lethal disease. In the second scenario, a patient arrives for a scheduled appointment at NYC Health Hospitals with the same scenario and symptoms as the first patient, and the team has to identify and isolate the patient. Both exercises allowed FDNY EMS to practice full-body personal protective equipment while taking care of a patient and undergoing decontamination protocols. They go on to say more, but I think you guys get the point, right? Now, obviously, it's good to be prepared. But usually when people are getting prepared for something, it's because they know something's coming. Let's just be honest. You're usually not preparing for something that you don't think is going to happen. The likelihood of this or another illness spreading in America is very high, right? And them trying to downplay the likelihood is really weird to me, because they've been upplaying and basically going overboard with a lot of stuff the past few years, right? Why did they go so overboard with basically the common cold? But here we have something serious, and they're like, oh, you don't have to worry. The likelihood of it coming here is very slim. As if people aren't flying to America from other countries every day, as if illegal immigrants aren't pouring across our borders every day. The likelihood of this stuff spreading here is not slim. It's actually very likely. But the reason these training exercises always freak me out, they always make me raise my eyebrow, is because more often than not, when something crazy happens, when we have one of these big events, when we have an outbreak like what we had a few years ago, if you do digging, and you don't have to dig deep, but if you do your research, you will see that there's always training exercises that come beforehand. And it's almost as if, and maybe they don't, but it's almost as if someone, the powers that be, may have knowledge about what's to come. And if you think that the higher-ups don't have knowledge about things before we do, you're crazy. Just look at how members of Congress move and buy and sell stocks right before a big event, right before a new war pops off. Members of Congress are buying stocks because they know it's happening. Right before the lockdowns, members of Congress were buying and selling off stocks because they already knew it was coming. And those aren't even the highest up on the totem pole. So all I'm saying here is that there may be nothing to this, but we do have this crazy story. And it sounds like this guy may have had the Marburg, just spewing blood all over an airplane. And then once you look into it, it turns out that Marburg has been spreading around kind of secretly because we haven't been talking about it much over here in America. And it turns out, even though we're not talking about the Marburg, oh, you better believe they're having these crazy training exercises getting ready. So I'm not saying anything's going to come of this, but I think it's important from here on out, after what happened to all of us a few years ago, we have to stay on top of stuff like this. Even if it turns out to be nothing, we need to ring the alarms. When you see something, say something. So in your research, when you're looking into things, when you see something like this, you need to say something, because it may be the first warning. It may be the first chance that someone gets to let people know that, hey, there's something going on here, if you know what I mean. But let me know your thoughts about this down in the comments below. If you're feeling generous, you can donate to the channel via Cash App. I'll have my Cash App in the pinned comment. You could also donate via Super Thanks, or for free, you could help the channel by liking, subscribing, ringing that notification bell, and all of that good stuff. But with that being said, I'll talk to you all very soon in the next one.